too.
All right, so I'm closing my chat so that I can see people. Okay, so I think I can begin right now at 7:30. Um, Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to participate in this Women's League wonderful project. Um, I looked at the names
Names?
when they I looked at the various names of people as they came to me on the email. I'm sorry to say that I did not find among you people that I know. I recognized exactly one name, but she's not on right now. I won't mention it. She happens to be the mother of two rabbis, both of whom are, one is a former student, one is a friend of mine. But it's just fantastic that you're all enrolled in this course and preparing, I don't know when, but to celebrate the Bat Mitzvah completion. So tonight's subject is Shabbat, and I was just looking at some of the answers that people were putting into the chat, and one answer actually jumped out at me because I agree wholeheartedly that Kabbalat Shabbat, the Friday night service, is my favorite service of the week. And the reason I like it, maybe it's, I think your name is Julia, whoever put that up. The reason I like it is that it's musical and it's short, and you're in and out in an hour, and it's moving and it's enriching, and then you go home, or now we're at home, and then you have a wonderful Shabbat meal. So it's kind of all of a flow. And the other thing I was thinking as I was reading the answers in the chat is, since so many of you are already celebrating Shabbat in such meaningful ways, I asked myself, why am I going to be spending all of tonight trying to get you to observe Shabbat in meaningful ways? You're already there, but we're going to look at the texts.
We can start with our Lasok prayer if you would like to lead us. And we are just wanted to say we are so glad to have you, to learn from you tonight. And I did send out your bio, so everybody
no
can
need to repeat that. Okay.
have a little bit of background. But well, we'll work on that after.
Okay.
If you could lead us in the prayer, and then I will stop
Okay.
and go get your materials for it.
Fine.
Let me just, I just want to make sure everybody's muted, so it's not too much of a.
Oh yes, that is the
And
problem.
you will have to unmute yourself then too.
Oh. Right, now there we go.
Okay. There we go.
All right. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praised are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, whose commandments add holiness to our life, and who gave us the commandment to study words of Torah, which we are about to do. All right.
Thank you.
Now I see even more people on screen, but still not the person I was referring to. Not a problem. And we are going to be looking at two major chunks of text tonight: Shabbat in the Torah, and then some selections about Shabbat in the Talmud. Because as I think you already know, for many, many years, I was a professor of Talmud at the Jewish Theological Seminary. Many, many rabbis passed through my classroom. I'm now the E. Billy Ivry Emerita Professor of Talmud and Rabbinic Culture. So that gives me authority to interpret these texts tonight, which you will soon see on screen. And I was also sent by Julia the packet of Shabbat materials that is part of your curriculum. I looked those over. Those are wonderful materials. In a limited way, what I'm doing tonight overlaps with that. Like they and I, or that curriculum and I, both are highlighting the story about the manna, which is in the book of Exodus, chapter 16, right after they leave Egypt. But in other ways, we don't overlap. And there were other texts, yes, that overlapped, but then there are many more over there that I'm not using, and many more that I'm using that are not in the curriculum. I'm assuming that you get to keep the materials that I'm using tonight. Is that right, Julia? They can get it in the chat, however this works.
I can send out the text too that you are teaching from.
Okay.
After the class.
That's fine. That's fine. Just perhaps people are going to be interested in going back and reminding themselves about it. Okay, so
So let me go ahead and put that up.
yes, that would be great. All right, we need it a
And
little.
I'm going to zoom in.
Yes,
Mm,
okay, on my screen. There,
It's coming, it's coming.
it's coming. Okay, yes, that's okay. I think
Okay.
that's good. That's good. Okay, so I'm going to begin with in the beginning. All right. I think you know that chapter 1 and chapter 2 of the book of Breshit, of Genesis, we've got two creation stories. Um, and what I began noticing as I was preparing to teach tonight is that the second story, which may be older than the first, it's hard to say, but there's definitely a theory that the second story uh, became part of Breshit early, and then the first one was added as a kind of introduction, and that's going to fit in really well with what I'm about to say. So the second creation story introduces you to the cast of characters, to Adam and to Eve, and then the next chapter we've got the snake. Of course, we've got God in there, and so on. And then the stories develop from there and the generations of people and so on. But now I want to go back to Genesis number 1. And I realized when I was reading it just now, this week, that the climax of the creation story, okay, I think you all know this, but God created this on the first day and the second day and so on. On the sixth day, which is we call Friday, God created human beings, and then he told human beings that you are going to be in charge of the animal universe and so on, and you're to be stewards of the land. But anything animal or plant is available for you to eat. Some of that gets changed later on. But that's not the end of the story. That's by the way, is the end of chapter 1. But at the very beginning of chapter 2, and I didn't put the first verse of chapter 2 on screen for a reason, but the beginning of chapter 2, which I think should have been at the end of chapter 1, but whoever broke these up into chapters, they have their own logic. So this is actually the climax of this version of the story of creation, namely that, yes, we've got a series of successive separations as God keeps, creating more and more. One thing is created from another thing, but in the end, what we have here is this. This is all about God in a certain way. That is to say, God is actively creating everything in the universe for the first 6 days of time, if you want to talk about it like that. And then on the seventh day, it says here, Vayachal Elohim bayom hashvi. I think a lot of people know these words because they're the first paragraph of the Kiddush of Friday night. We'll talk more about that at the very end. So it says here, on the seventh day, God finished his work. Now, I'm going to come back to this verse and talk about a little bit more in a moment, but let me just look at that phrase. There's something very strange. On the seventh day, God finished his work, but we are all under the impression, and the verse goes on to say that on the seventh day, God had already finished his work and ceased. Okay, it says in the continuation of the verse on screen, and he ceased on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. By the way, let me just issue a disclaimer right now. This is Jewish Publication Society translation, and God is represented masculine, and we're not taking any stands here on that. It's just for ease of reference, keeping God in the masculine. I didn't change anything. All right, so coming back to our verses. Is God creating on the seventh day, or is God ceasing from creative work on the seventh day? This verse number 2, on the seventh day, is a little bit self-contradictory, you might say. And the traditional commentators, Rashi is one of them, and Radak, Rav David Kimchi, is another. They each confront this strange verse. So Rashi says, well, there's only a hair, like a moment differentiated between the sixth day and the seventh day. So as God is finishing his work, like maybe there's a nanosecond of the seventh day, according to Rashi, that God is still creating, and then end of nanosecond, God ceases from his work. And Radak says something a little different. He actually says, I'll read the Hebrew words, Lo nishar malacha la'asot b'yom hashvi'i. Radak simply says there was no more labor, no more work to be completed on the seventh day. So this verse doesn't mean that God completed his work on the seventh day. It means, which means he was still working on the seventh day. No, there was nothing left to do. All right. I'm just putting that out there because if you look at this verse, you might be confused by it. But there are four verbs in these two verses. The first verb is on the seventh day, God finished. There's a verb. And then it says, and he ceased. That's vayishbot. And then in the next verse, vayivarech, God blessed. And a little further in that verse, vayikadesh, and God declared it holy. All right. So what I'm trying to say is, it seems to me that if you read chapter 1 together with these couple of verses in chapter 2, you realize that there's kind of an ascendance, that you go from the first day to the seventh day, and the seventh day is the climax. And God is basically saying, I, God, created this world. And what did I, God, do on the seventh day? I'm going to use a term now. I admired my work. I kind of sat down in a comfortable chair. I kind of leaned back, clasped my hands, look at this beautiful globe that I have just created and all the things that I have filled it with. And I blessed the seventh day. It's a little bit hard for me to interpret exactly what that means. I'm not saying that I know, I don't know. But then God declares it holy. And this is already a hint that God wants the world that he created to do on the seventh day, to observe the seventh day, to behave on the seventh day in the same way that he behaved. So God creates the 6 days. This is what Genesis is telling us, first chapter. And then God said, look what I'm going to do on the seventh day. I want you to do the same, which means that God is asking us to devote the seventh day to him. Okay. The logic that I was just presenting would be as follows. Well, if God worked for 6 days at creative endeavors and then ceased from working on the seventh, well, then we should do creative work for 6 days and sit back and cease work and reflect on the seventh. That's going to be true. But at the same time, the Torah emphasizes Shabbat Ladonai. Our Sabbath is to be honoring God. Our Sabbath is to be a day on which we look at the world and we say, God created the world. We honor God, we respect God, we admire God for doing all of this. Plus, lo ya'asa kom lacham, which means, and yes, on the seventh day, in terms of our own work, we're supposed to cease doing whatever it is that we do on the first 6 days of the week. So all I'm saying is, if you look at Genesis, the first 2 chapters, the story of the Bible, the story of Genesis, story of Adam and Eve, begins in chapter 2. And I'm claiming that chapter 1 is an introduction to the entire Torah. And chapter 1 is basically saying to us, as Jews or as human beings, to everybody who reads the Torah, which is also the beginning of the entire Bible, is saying, well, there's something that's very, very important that I need to tell you, God is saying right now, and that is every seventh day, every Saturday, every Shabbat, I want you to do what I did. It's a blessed day. It's a holy day. A holy day, set it aside. That's what Lekadesh means, to set aside. Set it aside, do things differently. And I think you're supposed to read the rest of the Torah in the light of that overview, that introduction that chapter 1 is. Okay, I cannot say that I looked at chapter 1 and understood it that way for all these years past. It's only because I've been thinking about Shabbat that I realize that the Torah is telling you, all of us, that is, that the point of all of this creation, the point, I'll be even more general, the point of our existence is to observe Shabbat in the sense that we admire, we recognize, we acknowledge the creative work of God. That's a very heavy theology to lay on you, but it seems to me that that's what that first chapter is saying. And the last thing I'll say about this, and we'll move on to the next text, is there's virtually no connection between chapter 1 of Breshit and chapter 2. I'm excluding the first couple of verses, but the minute chapter 2 starts with a different creation story and it runs with that, and you've got all those characters, I'm just saying that chapter 1 is separate from the entire Torah, whereas chapter 2 is very connected. That's where it all happens. That's where it all begins. So I think if you divorce chapter 1 from the rest of the Bible, from the rest of the book of Genesis, you say, oh my God, Shabbat is even more important, more central to Judaism than I ever imagined. Okay, we now move on. We're going to have a breakout room now, because the next thing to look at is the story about the manna. So Julia is going to send us all, me too, to breakout rooms to discuss for 5 minutes what role does Shabbat play in the manna episode. I just want to emphasize the following before the breakout rooms. We've got stories about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, about Sarah, Rachel, Rebecca, and who did I leave out? Rachel, Rebecca, and Leah. Okay, and we've got other people. Ask yourselves now, is there any reference anywhere in the book of Genesis to those patriarchs, matriarchs, and other characters observing Shabbat, observing Pesach, observing any mitzvah? Essentially not. All right. So that's supporting my. So okay, never mind what I was going to say. But the first reference we get in the Torah to the observance of Shabbat is immediately upon leaving Egypt, the Song of the Sea. They're on dry land. They start complaining, and I'm not going to say any more. But now we're going to breakout room. We get to the story of the manna. And the question I would like you to discuss is, what role does Shabbat play in the manna episode? Okay, muted. All right. So what the group I was in turned out 5 minutes was hardly enough time. What I want to say is that chapter 16, the manna story in the book of Exodus. Okay, we saw Genesis 1, or the beginning of Genesis 2, and that's God observing the Sabbath, telling us it's holy, blessing it, but that's not us. The first time that we, the people, are addressed and told to observe the Sabbath is in Exodus 16. And what I find particularly interesting is that in Exodus 16, I'm particularly focusing on verses 21 and beyond that, but it doesn't matter where you look right now. There we go. Okay, so I want to go to verse 21. This is the handout I prepared, and that's it, I bolded it. So if we look at verse 23, okay, the Lord said, this is what the Lord meant, tomorrow is a day of rest, a holy Sabbath. Okay, we got that. And then bake what you would bake and boil what you would boil. Those words are being addressed to women, because in the ancient world, the ancient patriarchally configured world, it was the women who did the baking and the boiling. I will tell you that in the Talmud, which is my area of competence, men are reported and described as doing the barbecuing. Men are building the fires and grilling the meat, which is what we see today apparently in suburbs. I live in Manhattan, not in a suburb, but I gather even from my own sons that the outdoor grills, it's my son Ariel who's out there with the steak, not my daughter-in-law Susanna. So, but here we're baking and boiling. So what I'm claiming is that the very first time the mitzvah of Shabbat is given to the people with instructions, the instructions are being given to the women, because it's the women who are baking and boiling. So they're being told that on Friday, when you kind of magically come back home with your pots and pans full of manna, you're going to discover that even though you thought you were gathering just the same amount you gathered Thursday and Wednesday, somehow on Friday, the amount doubled, and now you're going to bake. And the question that the commentators discuss is, are the women, I'm talking about the women, I have to tell you the commentators do not talk about the women, but I'm going to do it my way. Are the women being told to bake all of the manna that they have, so they'll have cooked manna for Friday night and for Shabbat? Or are they being told, this is the questions and the commentators, or are they being told, cook today, so you'll have your Friday night cooked manna? And you know the midrash is that when you ate the manna, it tasted like whatever you wanted it to taste. Okay, that's very nice midrash. But let me get back to this verse. So, or are the women being told, okay, um, today you're going to eat cooked manna, today, tonight, but tomorrow, today you're only going to cook the amount of manna that you usually cook. And tomorrow, according to Ibn Ezra, one of our big biblical commentators, he says on Saturday they're going to have raw manna. Okay, but I certainly cannot tell you whether they ate cooked manna or raw manna on the Sabbath. I'm just interested in saying that the original or the earliest reference to Jews, Israelites observing the Sabbath, the instruction is given to women, all right? Because the men are not cooking and baking, and the men are not going out there on Saturday to gather the manna, and neither are the women going out there on Saturday. So how do you observe Shabbat in the desert? When you've left Egypt and you're on your way to the promised land, okay, the way you observe Shabbat, if you're a woman, is on Friday, you don't cook on Shabbat. That's what I'm trying to say. However much you cook on Friday, I can't say. Either you cook double amount or one amount or whatever. But the notion that on Friday you cook for Shabbat and that the earliest restriction of Shabbat is being addressed to the women, ladies, get out of the kitchen. You are not, well, there's no kitchen in the desert, but whatever, simple ways of building a fire and whatever it is they did, okay, you have to imagine that, fill it in. Women, you are to observe Shabbat because boil and bake are being addressed to the women. So that's my take on this earliest reference of telling the people, the Jewish people, the Israelite people, I keep using those names interchangeably, Israelites and Jews, the original of mitzvah, the original mitzvah of Shabbat is being addressed to the women. Okay, I'm now going on in the screen share. Well, let me say one more thing. In verse 29, it says, mark that the Lord has given you the Sabbath, gives you 2 days food on the 6th day. We knew that already. And then the verse says, let everyone remain where he is. Let no one leave his place on the 7th day. Now, what the rabbis of the Talmud learn from that verse, in Hebrew, it's al yatzeh ish memakomo b'yom hashvi'i. What the rabbis of the Talmud learn from there is no excessive amount of walking on the 7th day. They talk about a Shabbat boundary. They also derive from that verse no carrying items from domain to domain. You don't lug, your heavy books on Shabbat, or even pots of cooked food. You don't lug them on Shabbat from your home into the public domain to somebody else's home. That's what the rabbis learned from there. But it occurred to me as I was reading these verses that there's a very simple, obvious meaning to no one should leave his place on the 7th day. What God is really saying there, or what Moses is communicating to the people that God said is, don't go out and look for manna on the 7th day. And some people went ahead and didn't listen and did go out. Okay, but that's the simple meaning of that verse. It has nothing to do with don't walk too much, don't carry from domain to domain. As I said, when the rabbis of Talmud are looking for a biblical verse upon which to pin their own rules, they will interpret a biblical verse not according to the plain sense meaning. And I will confess, I never even paid attention to the fact that the plain sense meaning of do not leave your place, let no one leave his place on the 7th day, its plain sense meaning is don't go out to collect manna, all right? Because that's how God is introducing the concept of the Sabbath to the people, meaning you're going to cook on Friday, you're not going to cook on Sabbath, and you're not going to leave home to go collect that manna wherever it is outside somewhere that you collect the manna on the Sabbath. So that is the beginning of the Sabbath, but that's certainly not the end of the Sabbath. So now we get to the 10 Commandments. I just need the screen to go up a little bit. I see it. Okay, down. All right, we'll leave it like this with the English. All right, the next reference, that was The manna is Exodus 16, chapter 16. Chapter 20, I need to, okay, I will tell you. This is chapter 20, verses 8 to 11. Okay, I see, yeah, I wrote Exodus 20, verses 8 to 11. The fourth commandment of the 10 commandments is the commandment to observe the Sabbath. And I just want to briefly compare how the Sabbath is presented in the 10 commandments in Exodus to how it's presented in the 10 commandments in Deuteronomy, which comes next. So in Exodus, there's something very famous here. I'm going to say it anyway, and then I'll say something perhaps less famous. The fourth commandment in the Hebrew begins with the word zachor, which here in English is remember. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. The 10 commandments as it appears in Devarim, let's just go down a little bit on the screen. Okay, in Devarim, if you look at the Hebrew, it says shamor instead of zachor, and the English it's observe. So in Exodus, it's observe the Sabbath. I'm sorry, in Exodus, it's remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And in Deuteronomy, almost word for word, the same commandment, but not quite. Instead of instead of zachor, which is remember the Sabbath day, the verb here is observe. So I think the Bible people, the Bible scholars will tell you, don't make a big deal about these differences. This is just two versions of the 10 commandments with slight variations. Well, I'm not going to comment on that, but I will tell you what the rabbis said. And they said, Zachor v'shamor b'dibur echad, meaning, and I'll comment on what each of these two words means in just a moment. They said those two words, b'dibur echad, Zachor and Shamor, came out of God's mouth, as if God has mouth, okay, anthropomorphic God, as if God has a mouth. The two words God pronounced simultaneously, Zachor and Shamor. So they're two sides of the same coin, so to speak, two sides of the same commandment. You know, in the Lecha Dodi, it depends on how many verses, stanzas of Lecha Dodi the various synagogues will sing. But Zachor v'Shamor b'dibur echad is one of the phrases in the Lecha Dodi, beautiful poetry that's part of the Kabbalat Shabbat service, the Friday night service. Now, what do the rabbis say is the difference between Zachor and Shamor? Again, I think this is pretty well known. Zachor, to remember, is to perform the positive acts of Shabbat, which we'll talk more about later, like Kiddush and Havdalah, whereas Shamor, observe, it's better in the Hebrew than in the English. Shamor means to refrain from, to guard yourself from. So whereas Exodus is telling you that there are acts which you must perform on the Sabbath to make the Sabbath meaningful to yourselves, Deuteronomy is saying, yes, of course you want to make the Sabbath meaningful, but the way to do that is to create space for the positive acts of Shabbat. And how do you create space for the positive acts of Shabbat? By refraining from many of the acts that you do that you perform on ordinary days. So I happen to like this very much. I love Shabbat myself, in case that isn't obvious. I will say it explicitly. I think Shabbat during the pandemic for sure, but even in the rest of my life, as an academician, I worry about, publish or perish, and will I finish the curriculum in time, and is that student annoying me or not annoying me, whatever. These things crowd your mind 6 days a week, and then Shabbat, you just turn it all off. By refraining from work, you open up space, you open up opportunities in your life to fill that day with, shall we say, Shabbistic acts, with acts that relate to the Sabbath. As we'll talk more at the very end about Kiddush and Havdalah, lighting candles, and so on. So that's Shamor v'Zachor. But there's something more important to me to point out here, and that is there are two different rationales for observing the Sabbath. So and they're both on screen right now. I think they are. No, it's okay. One of them is on screen. Let's go back to the Exodus one, because I think I highlighted it. Yes. So in Exodus, and you can bring it up a little bit, because in 6 days, the rationale for the Sabbath in the Sabbath commandment out of 10 in Exodus is, in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth and so on, and God blessed the Sabbath day. So this is harking back very clearly. It's using the same language that we saw in Genesis, the beginning of chapter 2. God blessed the seventh day. God declared it holy. So yes, right here, we're being told, Genesis didn't tell us this, but now Exodus 20 is telling us, observe the Sabbath, refrain from work on the Sabbath. That's here, you shall not do any work, verse 10 and so on. And why? What is this Sabbath all about? Because we are acknowledging that the Lord made the heaven and the earth and so on. So it's that double message. We refrain from work on the seventh day, imitating God. In other words, we benefit for sure. Renewal on the Sabbath is beneficial to us as human beings, but at the same time that it's beneficial to us, the motive here for observing the Sabbath, the rationale for observing the Sabbath is that we acknowledge God's role in creating the universe, and then on the seventh day, sitting down, reflecting, admiring, and so on. So that's the rationale in Exodus. And then if we go further down now to the 10 Commandments as it's presented in Deuteronomy, remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Lord God freed you, and so on. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded to observe the Sabbath day. Now, I personally find this extremely inspiring, because for me, Exodus wasn't sufficient. I'm talking about just me now, maybe for you too, maybe not for you too. Okay, I like the idea of Shabbat Ladonai, on the seventh day. I sit back and I look around and acknowledge and I think about God and creating the world. But this I really like. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. And by the way, let me just go back to verse 14 right here. Not only do you rest, but your son, your daughter, by the way, wife doesn't appear, but apparently she's understood as part of the you. Okay, people do talk about this. Your son, your daughter, your male, your female slave, your animals. In other words, you don't just think about yourself and you don't just think about God on the Sabbath, but you remember you're a slave, which means, as I understand it, you remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. You remember how awful that is. And that should guarantee that you would never enslave anybody else. So on the Sabbath, when we appreciate that we have the control over our lives, that we can refrain from work on the seventh day, we want to make sure there's a moral push here. You know, it's very nice that you are free and that you can observe the Sabbath, but you got to remember what's happening with other people. You were a slave in the land of Egypt. God freed you. Well, we're supposed to imitate God. If we see slavery, we are being asked to intervene and to work towards liberation of all people. Imitating God. God has a mighty hand, outstretched arm, redeemed us. So there's a deeply embedded in us social message on Shabbat. So there's the theological piece of Shabbat. God created the world. We should appreciate God created the world. We should imitate God and stop, all our creative endeavors on the Sabbath. But in addition to that, and at the same time as that, we've got to think about other people and what it means for other people who don't have the control, who are going to work 6 days and on the seventh and the eighth and ninth and so on, because they have masters. So there's a deep Jewish moral message. If you combine Exodus and Deuteronomy, deep Jewish moral message that we are our brothers and our sisters' keepers. And Shabbat reminds us of that. That is the message of the Deuteronomy version of the Shabbat. All right, now we keep going. And Exodus, what's next is Exodus 31. I just want to look at this quickly, and then we're going to move on to the Talmud and a breakout room. Okay, Exodus 31, and the top is on screen right now in Hebrew as well. Vishamru b'nei Israel tashabat. There it is. Okay, Exodus 31 begins with, okay, I gave you all those instructions about the sanctuary, says God, and you're building the sanctuary in the desert. the Mishkan. But very nice that you're building the sanctuary, but you have to keep the Sabbath too. All right. And then, by the way, God gets real serious here in verse 14. He says, he who profanes it, the Sabbath, shall be put to death, and so on. And then when we get to verse 16, Vishamru b'nei Israel et Shabbat, and these are the verses that are included in our liturgy, our Sabbath liturgy. And if you make Kiddush, if you recite Kiddush at lunch on Shabbat, it can be a short Kiddush at lunch, but if it's a longer Kiddush at lunch, you recite these verses. So here Shabbat is called a brit, a covenant between God and the Jewish people. That's what it says here. La'asot haShabbat l'doratam brit olam. The Jewish people are to observe Shabbat in perpetuity, forever and ever, as the generations roll on. Shabbat is a sign that God created the world in 6 days, Sheshet Yamim, okay? And let me see, it shall be a sign. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth, and on the seventh he ceased from work and was refreshed. So this is adding that additional piece to the Sabbath, that, and this kind of goes back to what I was saying about the beginning, the first reference, Genesis 1 and the beginning of Genesis 2. Sabbath is critically important in the panoply, in the array of Jewish mitzvot. Yes, we've got Pesach, and we've got Shavuot coming up soon, and Sukkot, and Kashrut, and Tefillah, prayer, and so on. We've got lots of things that we're supposed to do. I'm talking about between person and God, bein Adam Makom, as we say. But we have to recognize all those things are wonderful for us, and we should observe them. But Shabbat is, in a sense, tops all of them. Okay, I'm going to say something right now that I was going to say later, but I think now is a good time to say it. In the Kiddush, okay, we don't have to look at the Kiddush right now. I have the Kiddush, the Friday night Kiddush in front of me. You probably are familiar. I'm going to read 3 phrases in Hebrew right now, and then I'll say them in English. In the middle of the second paragraph of the Kiddush, the one that begins, Asher Kidshanu Mitzvotav Ratzavanu, there are 3 characterizations of Shabbat in this paragraph of Kiddush. Number 1 is called Zikaron L'Maaseh Breshit, which means Shabbat is a commemoration of the creation in Breshit, and the Genesis, the creation of the world. And then the second one, I'm going to go back to the second one. The third one is, oh, okay, thank you. Look at that. They're all color-coded. This is fantastic. Okay, I didn't do that. Julia, thank you. The first one is in tan, Zikaron L'Maaseh Breshit. That's the first characterization of Sabbath, a reminder of creation. I'm skipping the second. The third is Zecher Litziat Mitzrayim, recalling the Exodus from Egypt. So we talked about that already, the 10 Commandments in Exodus, 10 Commandments in Deuteronomy. But the middle one, people don't really recognize, is a characterization of Shabbat. It says here, Yom Tchilah L'Mikra E Kodesh. Tchilah means the beginning or the first. Yom is day. The first day of the Mikra E Kodesh, of the holidays. What does it calls? Here it's sacred assemblies. That's fancy. It means in the book of Vayikra, we get a list of the holidays. I wrote it down. This is Vayikra, yes, Vayikra 23. We get a list of the Jewish holidays, of Pesach, of Shavuot, of Sukkot, of Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah is called Yom Hadin, or Yom Teruah rather. Okay, but the very first item, the very first, I should use the word holiday, or sacred day on that list is Shabbat. So that's what the Kiddush is saying. The Kiddush is saying, yes, and this all comes together very nicely. The Kiddush is saying, yes, Shabbat reminds you of creation. Shabbat reminds you of the Exodus. And if Shabbat reminds you of the Exodus, it's that moral message. You were slaves and God freed you. So if you see slavery, you've got to act to get people to freedom. Terrific. But right there in the middle, it says Shabbat is the first one on the list of the holidays. So this is a little bit ironic. Do Jews observe the Sabbath more or less than they observe the holidays. And I'm going to answer my own question. Jews observe the holidays more than they observe Sabbath. Jews come to shul on the high holidays. Jews have a Pesach Seder, and Hanukkah is a much later holiday. Jews observe Hanukkah, and so on. I hate to say it, but Shavuot is a little bit forgotten in all of this. But really, what the Torah is saying is Shabbat comes first. By the way, Shabbat comes every week, and that's probably the reason that it's more interesting to observe Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Pesach, which come once a year. We don't get tired of them. They're not boring. Shabbat is every seventh day. You're like, enough already. What do you want from me? Well, the Torah wants a lot from you. And the Torah is saying Shabbat in Exodus is the creation reminder. Shabbat in Deuteronomy is the moral slavery freedom reminder. And Shabbat is more important, or it comes first on the list of all the holidays. God wants you to observe every single Saturday as Shabbat. All right. And that's what this Kiddush is all about. And I will venture that if you asked anybody who's been reciting Kiddush their entire life, what is the message of that paragraph of the Kiddush? They're going to start saying things, Shabbat and love, B'ahava, and God gave us Shabbat. Well, that's not wrong, but the point of that paragraph of Kiddush is to say Shabbat is three things, and you should regard Shabbat from all of those three perspectives. Okay, so that was Shabbat as a covenant and ongoing in perpetuity. And now we're going to go to a breakout room, and we're about to go to Shabbat in the Talmud. So the question that I want you to consider, two questions that I want to consider in the breakout room is, why do we light Shabbat candles? And who is supposed to light them? Okay.
Welcome back, everybody.
We talked as fast as we could, Julia.
I'll give you an
That
extra
was the
minute.
fastest 5 minutes.
Too short,
I'll
a
give-
minute and a half maybe.
I'll give you an extra minute in the last.
Yeah, I was the one. How do I go to gallery view? What am I doing, Julia?
Right, so you have to go up to view at the top and then gallery view, and make sure you're back at full screen again, so you see
That's it.
everybody.
That's it, full screen. Okay, I'm good.
Don't you hate this technology?
Yes,
My life.
we're getting
It's
there.
wonderful and
When you know
terrible
how to use
sometimes.
it.
Yes.
I'm scared of it.
Okay, so what I want to begin with, we're going to go to the screen share in just a moment. I see there's a question, why do many Shabbat menorahs have 3 candle spots? Well, the way I understand it is, so happens I was given when I got married 2 Shabbat candelabras, each with 3, but they were also adjustable. You could remove the 3 and just have 1 and 1. I don't think 3 is the only number. When I've been, before the pandemic, to various stores that sell Silver Judaica, there's 3, there's 5. Of course, 2 is very, very common. There seems to be a developing custom that you light the same number of candles as people in the household. So for instance, I have 3 children. In theory, I would have lit 5 candles every Friday night. We didn't. We stayed with 2. But there are, so why do many have 3? Because you can have 3, which is parents and 1 child, and then another 3 if you have another 3 children or whatever. Okay, I want to go back to the talk a little bit about what's coming up now in the screen share. It has been true in art for many, many, many generations that what artists depict, the person whom artists depict as lighting Shabbat candles is always the woman. I cannot imagine any piece of art that I've ever seen in which there is a man going like this, or just a man standing with candles and reciting the blessing. Like lighting Shabbat candles and the woman lighting them, it's kind of, that's the way it is. These two go together. So I want to try to convince you that's not what the rabbis of the Talmud were telling us. So the first text, we can go to text now, Julia. It's Shabbat in the Talmud. The first text is one of the most offensive texts in the entire Talmud. I'm going to read it in Hebrew and English. Ashalosh avirot nashim meitot bishat leidatan, which means for 3 transgressions, women die in childbirth. And if I don't continue, that's that's sufficiently horrific as is, talking about women dying in childbirth because of religious transgressions. Like what? Why men transgress? Women are dying in childbirth because they transgress. And then what are these transgressions? Al shainan zihirot benida, because they are not careful. Careful is a very vague term. Okay, it doesn't say that they don't observe the laws of menstrual purity. Nida is the rules of having to immerse in the mikveh at the end of the menstrual period, and then resuming sexual relations. So it says here, there are going to be 3 reasons listed why women die in childbirth. It just kills me to say these words. I'm gonna argue that it doesn't mean what you think it means, but I have to begin with telling you what sure looks like it's saying. Women die in childbirth because they're not careful about the laws of menstrual purity and not careful about challah. Challah doesn't mean that same wonderful rich egg bread that we put on the table Friday night. Challah is simply the mitzvah of when you bake bread, any bread, and the dough has to be of a certain size, a certain volume, then you must pull off a piece of it back then and give it to the Kohen. That's called hafrashat challah. Challah just meaning a loaf, not any particular kind of bread. So if women are not careful about pulling off a piece of dough and giving it, there are many priestly gifts because priests needed to depend on other people to support them, the Kohanim back then. So if women are not careful about laws of menstrual purity, if they don't observe the rule of giving a piece of dough from every batch that they bake to the Kohen, and finally, ubahat lakat haner, and if they're not careful about Shabbat, I'm going to use the word candle, but of course, we're talking about oil lamps in the ancient world, but it's just hard to keep saying lamps, so I'm going to use candles. So I'm going to forget now. Let me ignore for the moment the first 2 reasons. But what's being said here is if women are not careful about lighting candles, meaning Friday night for Shabbat, they're going to die in childbirth. Now, okay, I've spent my life studying Talmud and teaching Talmud. And let me just put this in context. Yes, it seems that that's exactly what it says. And that's horribly, horribly offensive. But here, let me give you some context. It's not on screen. This is Mishnah Shabbat, chapter 2, Mishnah 6. So there are 5 Mishnahs that precede that Mishnah. And what are those 5 Mishnahs about, 5 paragraphs about, before we get to that offensive one? Oh, there are certain wicks which you should use and certain wicks you should not use. There are oils you should use, there are oils you should not use. If somebody is sick in your house and it's absolutely necessary to light a Shabbat lamp on Shabbat itself, which is violation, then you may go ahead and do it because it's a matter of saving life and so on. All of that is there. Law, halacha, rules of Jewish living. Then you get to this Mishnah. Women are going to die in childbirth. So the first thing I'm going to say is, occasionally in the Mishnah, the rabbis leave their halacha, their Jewish rules of practice, and they enter into the world of agadah, musing about things, philosophizing about things, ethical ideas, and so on. Now, you're still going to say, what? What's ethical? What's philosophical about women dying in childbirth if they're not careful about Shabbat candles? So it goes like this. The first thing I want to say is, do not take that as Jewish law, because it's not, because it is agadah. It is not halacha, rules. It is agadah, philosophizing, etc. Okay, does that make easier for me? Well, not yet. All right. So if it's Jewish philosophy or Jewish morals or something like that, Jewish ethics, so what is it saying? All right. Well, as you may know, if you've been exposed to Talmud before, we've got Mishnah, which is the early stratum of the Talmud, and then we've got Gemara, which is commentary on Mishnah, and there are 2 compilations. There's the Babylonian, we call it the Babylonian Talmud, but right now I'm talking about the Gemara. So we've got the Babylonian Gemara, although nobody ever calls it that, and we've got the Jerusalem Talmud. meaning we've got two parallel Talmuds, one of which was developed in Babylonia, where many Jews had moved from the land of Israel. They had been exiled there. Jewish communities developed. We've got a bunch of rabbis in Babylonia commenting on the Mishnah, and we've got another bunch of rabbis in the land of Israel also commenting on the Mishnah. And it is precisely at this point where they come up with wildly different interpretations of the Mishnah. So let's go back to the screen share. And I'm presenting what the rabbis in the land of Israel said, which I personally do not like, but it is my obligation to show it to you. I'm going to read it in English. The first Adam was the blood of the world. Okay, in other words, the Mishnah says because they're not careful regarding Nida Challah and lighting Shabbat lamps. And then the Jerusalem Talmud says the following. The first Adam was the blood of the world, and it gives a verse. And Eve brought about his death. And you say, what? I don't remember Eve stabbing Adam, killing him. Well, all it means is, the episode with the tree of knowledge and so on, and then they're kicked out of Eden, but it was she who handed him the apple. All right. So the Palestinian, we call it the Palestinian Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud, Eve brought about his death, made him mortal, by giving him the apple, and therefore the mitzvah of nida was given to women. I have to comment on that, but let me go down all three, and then I can comment on all three together. As for challah, why do women die in childbirth if they're not careful about challah? Because the first Adam was the challah, consecrated dough of the world. Wow, okay. We've got Eve being portrayed as a murderess, and we've got Adam in these glowing terms. He was, what does the first one say? He's the blood of the world. Don't ask me exactly what that means. I don't know. Here he is the challah of the world, and same thing. Eve brought about his death, and therefore the mitzvah challah was given to women. And regarding Shabbat lamps, the first Adam was the lamp of the world. Wow, men are amazing. All right, as it says, some verse. Eve brought about his death. She murdered him. And therefore the mitzvah of Shabbat lamps was given to women. Well, okay, I'm leaving the Babylonian Talmud for last for good reason. If the Mishnah was offensive, what I just read is even more offensive, because what the Jerusalem Talmud is saying, and this is quite wild, but I consulted with my colleague, Professor Bert Vazatsky at JTS, and he told me the following. What this Jerusalem Talmud statement, and it's about Agadah, so let's not get carried away here. This is not Jewish law, this is Jewish, thinking about values and so on. What the Jerusalem Talmud is saying here is that there is such a thing as original sin, that what Eve did to Adam, every time a Jewish woman is born, she is stained by the sin of Eve. This is very, very foreign to the way we understand things today. We usually understand original sin as being part of Christianity. But here, Vysotsky, who has studied these things in detail, he pointed out to me that here we have a Jewish concept of original sin only on women, okay? Because in, what does that begin in something fall, well, whatever, I can't remember the quote, but it's about Adam. In other words, the non-Jewish understanding of original sin doesn't limit original sin to women. But we Jews, okay, not we Jews, but the Jews who are living there in the land of Israel, they're saying, you know what that mission is all about? Because when you are born Jewish as a woman, you are stained, you are born into sin. And the only way for you to get out of sin and not die in childbirth, in other words, you deserve to die in childbirth, but you can save yourself by meticulously observing the rules of menstrual purity, the rules of consecrated dough, giving to the Kohen, and the rules of Shabbat lamps. All right? I'm not going to elaborate on that because that's plenty awful. But now we come to the Babylonian Talmud, and I'm pretty sure that many of you already know that Jewish practice and Jewish mitzvot and the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, it's not based on the Jerusalem Talmud. It's all based on the Babylonian Talmud. That's what we study today. Of course, at JTS, we also study Jerusalem Talmud, but not as much as the Babylonian Talmud. So Here is what the Babylonian Talmud, here is how it understands that Agadic Mishnah. And I'm going to keep repeating that Mishnah is not halacha, it is merely Agadah. Yes, we don't like it, but if it were halacha, I would like it a lot less. I would feel even worse about it than I currently do. So now let me read the English here. Like the Midrash expounded, okay, that doesn't matter. Here is an interpretation of the Mishnah. Said God, I put into you a life-giving measure of blood, and I warned you regarding matters of blood. In Hebrew, it's hisharti etchem. That's the same root as women are not careful about. Lahazhir means to warn, and it also means to be careful about. So, according to the Babylonian Talmud, the Mishnah, well, let me read all, and then I'll go back and tell you how it understands the Mishnah. I put into you a life-giving measure of blood. I warned you about blood. Oh, what does it mean? I warned you about blood. It means God is saying, I gave you various mitzvot which relate to blood. For instance, circumcision, blood of circumcision. In other words, I expect God is saying Jews to fulfill the mitzvah of circumcision. Or dam nida, or I expect Jewish women to observe the rules of menstrual purity, because that too relates to blood. And then it continues, I called you my firstborn, and I warned you about matters of firsts. Okay, there is a place in the Torah where God refers to the people of Israel as his Bechor, firstborn, which has special status. And then God says, and I gave you Bikurim, you've got to bring the first fruits to the temple. Motzi, you've got to recite the blessing right before you take the first bite of bread. There are many firsts in Judaism, okay? And you know, the firstborn son has to have Pidyon Haben, or the firstborn son or daughter, however you do that. But there's a lot of firsts. And finally, I put a soul into you that is called a lamb. So notice that we're talking about blood, which is nida, and challah means that you're giving a piece of dough. So that's, you know, before you bake, the first piece of dough goes to the Kohen. And then finally, hadlakat ner, I put a soul into you that is called the lamp. Yes, the soul inside us is often called the lamp that enlightens us. And I warned you about matters of lamps. So God is saying here, there are lamps. There's a menorah in the temple which has to be lit. There are Shabbos lamps which have to be lit. Eventually, there are Hanukkah lamps that have to be lit. If you abide by the mitzvot, I gave you fine. If not, behold, I will take your soul. Now, you may be wondering, what has this got to do? How is this why is she so excited about this? Okay, is this any better than what the Mishnah is saying? Is it any better than what the Jerusalem Talmud is saying? Well, yes. Okay, notice there is no Eve here. There is no Jewish woman. In all this English that I just read, these words that I just read are being addressed to all Jews, male, female, whatever. All Jews are expected to perform mitzvot relating to blood, relating to first, relating to lamps. So there's something brilliant here. The Babylonian Talmud read that Mishnah, which said women are going to die in childbirth if they're not careful about nida, challah, hadlakat haner. And the Babylonian Talmud, I don't know who, I have no way of knowing who. It says here in the presence of Rav Chizda, but it doesn't tell me who it is. But it got into the Talmud, so somebody thought this was good and important. And this person is saying, you know, that Mishnah, which looks like it's talking about women only for these various sins, they're going to be punished with death in childbirth? No, this person is saying, that's all wrong. It's not about women. It's about God saying to all Jews, men and women alike, there are blood mitzvot and firstborn mitzvot and lamp mitzvot, and you've got to observe them. And if you don't, I, God, will take your soul. Well, I can't soften that for you. So yes, that is strong language. If you don't observe the mitzvot the way I'm telling you to, says God, I'm going to just kill you off. But rather than look at that, I am saying what you really have to understand is, wow, somebody here, and it's in the Babylonian Talmud, somebody here found that Mishnah that women are dying in childbirth, And, men are not careful about mitzvot also. So what is this thing about women not careful? They're dying in childbirth, and men, they get off scot-free. What is this? So along came somebody and said, all of you have to perform mitzvot. And they tried to use the 3 words from the Mishnah, Nida Chala Hadlakat Haner, and kind of say there are many mitzvot, and God is saying you better be careful or I'm going to kill you. So, and then the Talmud says, okay, if you're a woman and you don't observe the mitzvot, well, you're vulnerable when you give birth, which is true even to this day. But of course, maternal mortality is way, way, way down. And back then it was much greater. So you're vulnerable at that. Okay, between dying, I'll try to get that in just a moment. And then the Talmud following this asked the question, well, if men are also being threatened with death if they don't perform mitzvot, well, they don't give birth. So when does that happen to men? And you know what the answer is in the Talmud? When they walk across a bridge, okay? What that is saying about the bridges in Babylonia, I can only say that they weren't stable bridges, that there may have been strong winds, which could blow you off a bridge. I don't know exactly, but what I really, really like, you'll forgive me if this sounds mean or schadenfreude, I like it that if the Mishnah says women who don't observe mitzvot could possibly die in childbirth when they are vulnerable, well, men who don't observe mitzvot, says the Babylonian Talmud, they're going to die when they are vulnerable. Well, they don't do childbirth. Fine. When a man walks across a bridge, that is a moment of vulnerability. All I'm saying is there is a thrust here towards equality. Okay. So, but coming back now, I believe that people have mistakenly concluded from this Agadic Mishnah, and I have to stress that it's not halacha, it is Agadah. I think people have concluded over the ages that therefore it is women's, it is the particular, it is specifically women who are obligated to light the Shabbat lamps. And that is not true, because if you read all the material about lighting lamps in the Talmud, I've actually written and published a little bit about this. The mitzvah is upon the house. A Jewish home, Friday night, should have candles lit. And the very next Mishnah, which I didn't cite here, says that when he comes home Friday afternoon from shul, not from shul, it doesn't make it clear, but when he enters the house Friday afternoon and it's almost dark, he has to say to her, have you lit the Shabbat candles? Meaning that ultimately it is his responsibility. She does housework. She is at home cooking for Shabbat, because that's how things were divided up in the ancient world. But it is he who has the obligation to see that the candles are lit, oil lamps are lit in the ancient world. So yes, I wish, watching Stessel, it's all about an artist. I wish there'd be some Jewish artist, or not Jewish artist, doesn't matter. I wish we would see an explosion of art in which we see homes with candles on the table, or specifically somebody who looks male lighting the Shabbat candles in order to disabuse people, in order to correct this mistake that it's she who has to light them. There's nothing wrong with a woman lighting candles in the home. And it's entirely possible that if in your schedule it works out that women are at home at the time that the candles need to be lit and men are not at home at that time, fine. So women can light them. But please don't think, and by the way, Lubavitcher has gone all out pushing lighting Shabbat candles as the obligation of the mother in the home and of the little girl in the home. Fine, let the people in the home light Shabbat candles, but I think people are mistakenly concluded, and I think Lubavitch is mistakenly concluding that it is incumbent upon her to light the candles and not upon the house. So you should just know that it is incumbent upon the house. Now, I see I only have 2 minutes left. So what do I want to do in the last 10 minutes?
Can we just, maybe you can address 2 questions. The first is, could you explain again what you mean by Agadah?
Oh,
what
yes.
that means compared to halacha?
Okay. So Nobody has yet come up with a satisfactory definition of Agadah. So the best definition, I'll try to explain, but the best definition of Agadah is anything that is not halakha. In other words, you can easily recognize what is halakha. It's something that tells you these are the wicks you do or do not put in your Shabbat lamps. This is how you slaughter an animal to keep it kosher. This is how you get rid of chametz from your house. That's all halakha. It's instructions on how to live a Jewish life. But when the rabbis, it doesn't happen a lot in the Mishnah. The Mishnah is mainly halakha. But when we get to the Gemara, the commentary on the Mishnah, if you want me to estimate, I have read that 2/3 of the Babylonian Talmud is halakha and 1/3 is Agadah. And I've even read that in the Jerusalem Talmud, the proportion is more even, like maybe even half is Agadah. In other words, whenever they start talking about people and the nature of people, or they talk about the universe, or they talk about love, or they talk about how hard work is, or how hard marriage is, all of that is there in the Talmud. Anything that's not telling you how to live your life as a Jew is considered Agadah. It's a very broad. Stories about biblical characters that appear in the Talmud, Agadah. Stories about rabbis who appear in the Talmud. Avnei Vachda is a very famous story, many other famous stories. Agadah. Okay, so it's in a way that the Talmud just seamlessly goes from halakha to Agadah, back to halakha, over Agadah, and so on. But this Mishnah about women and candlelighting, that is a rare instance, not the only, but a rare instance of the Mishnah, of an Agadic Mishnah, which people, I'm just going to say it again, have mistakenly interpreted as halakha. Oh, you women, you are the ones who have to light the candles. No, not so. Okay. What was the other question?
One more question. I think back to the phrasing in the Jerusalem Talmud. What's the difference between dying and having your soul taken by God? Is there a distinction?
No, not really. The Talmud just uses different phrases to describe end of life. And I will say the Mishnah that we've been working on, women and the candles and so on, dying in childbirth, that's from chapter 2 and of the Mishnah of Shabbat, Tractate Shabbat. If you go to the Gemara, I once taught in a rabbinical student class at JTS, we studied the entire chapter 2, the Gemara. We studied the Mishnah and the Gemara of the entire chapter of Shabbat. It was rapid reading because it's an awful lot of material there. And you get the impression that because of that Mishnah, what follows are pages and pages about what's called theodicy. Why do bad things happen to good people? So the rabbis, in other words, a woman dying in childbirth, that's why do bad things happen to good people? Yes, she is bringing new life into the world. You're certainly not going to tell me that if she wasn't careful, and we don't even know what it means not to be careful about Shabbat candles. It doesn't say she used the wrong wick or the wrong oil or lit them too late. It doesn't tell you what it means. Because I say it's agadic. If it were a halachic statement, it would be clear. This is what she didn't do, this is what she did do, and so on. But anyway, these rabbis are trying very hard to understand what's happening in the world, why young people, why children get sick and die. All of that is there in chapter 2 of Tractate Shabbat. So I don't distinguish between those two phrases. God takes your soul, which is a religious way of saying that when you die, it wasn't, divorced from God. It wasn't separated from God. It didn't just happen of natural causes. God decided it was time to take your soul, and it took it, and you died. So that's the best I can tell you then. All right, time is fleeting. So let me just say the last text before we get to the Kiddush and Havdalah, but thank goodness we've already looked a lot at the Kiddush. I have here the 39 forbidden labors on the Sabbath. And we don't really need to do the screen share now. I just want to say the first 11 begin with sowing and plowing and harvesting and end number 11 with baking. And then the next big group is a whole bunch of activities that result in creating a fabric. And then the next big group of activities, hunting a deer, slaughtering it, flaying it, and so on, has to do with preparing meat to eat or leather to use for tools or to build a tent or whatever. And then you have, that's the first 31. I've just covered 31 of the 39. And then there's a last bunch: writing, erasing, building, pulling down, extinguishing, kindling, which is from the Torah, striking with a hammer, and then carrying items from one domain to another. So all I want to say is what I think should be clear, what I find clear is that we don't have a comprehensive list here of what you're not allowed to do on the Sabbath. Rather, what we have here are some broad outlines, meaning God is saying, or it's actually not God, it's the rabbis who are figuring out these 39. The rabbis is saying anything that has to do with agriculture and preparation of bread, which would include, let's say, cooking, going back to that manna and so on, off limits. Okay, anything that has to do with producing fabric, producing leather, off limits. And they actually list a lot of the steps here. And even in the Gemara, they say, we don't even know the difference between me'abed and mochek and mechatech and so on. So it's like, I don't think you're meant to understand each one separately, but like, oh, creative endeavors, what I spend my time on if I'm in the ancient world, producing, agricultural products, putting food on the table. Okay, don't do that on Shabbat. And then building, writing, maybe that has to do with business, maybe it has to do with culture. So it's these broad categories. That's all I'm trying to say. People get caught up, 39 and everything else is, just 39. It's not just 39. It's broad cultural categories. And the truth is, if you keep reading what the rabbis have to say about don't work on Shabbat, and they, of course, prescribe punishments for you if you do work on Shabbat. Inadvertent, you just bring a sin offering. If you do it intentionally, you're supposed to be taken by God. Okay, they're pretty severe on this. The Torah says things like that, which I think we saw already. So there are actually hundreds, not just 39, there are hundreds of forbidden labors that you're not supposed to perform on the Sabbath, for which you'll be punished in exactly the same way that you will be punished if you violate any of these 39. So since I see that I have so little time left, I'm going to not say anything about Havdalah. I want to say something about Shabbat and your families. There are the positives and there are the negatives, okay? So yes, I told you before, the negatives give you the opportunity, give you space in your life to perform the positives. If you're not yet on board with full Shabbat observance, or if your family, if you are, but your family isn't, I would say forget the negatives. They're not important. I have 3 sons, not one of them is fully religious. But what I do, okay, to encourage a good feeling about Shabbat in the homes, my sons they all now have children. And we call them every Friday. Okay, we call one of them Friday afternoon, and my husband recites Kiddush for them. And my 9-year-old granddaughter, I don't know if she cares about Kiddush, maybe, but I can't be sure about that. But what she loves is striking a match. So every single Friday, this is beginning with a lockdown, because we didn't see these kids. We still haven't seen these particular kids for over a year. But we now have 5:45 p.m. every single Friday afternoon. We're on FaceTime with that particular family. She strikes a match. She recites the blessing of the candles, and then my husband recites Kiddush. And then the 6-year-old little brother is saying, I'm hungry, and they give him challah with butter and jam. And I guess they eat later, whatever. I don't know those details. So make it positive, okay? And the other family in California, I have 2 grandkids. We call them Saturday night. Time difference, 9:45 p.m. So for them, it's 6:45. I don't care if Shabbat is over, not over. For me, it's over by 9:45. And we make Havdalah for them. And do they love seeing that lamp? And of course, I sent them to the summon boxes, so they don't have to fight over it. And they each, if it's a girl and a boy, they each wear a beautiful yarmulke. Of course, I sent them, with planets on one of them and other things on another one. It's just do something positive, okay? Put flowers on the table Friday night. Make it a special meal Friday night. Of course, if you eat by candlelight, That's what we're being told to do. Wine and candles, lavish meal, special food Friday night. Forget all this, don't do this and don't do that. If you want to turn people on for Shabbat, you've got to make it appealing to them, meaningful to them, happy for them. And those are the ways in which I can imagine. Okay, I don't have any children living with me anymore, but if I recall, it seems to me I would make some of their favorite foods Friday night, just to get them to love Shabbat. As it turns out, not one of them is Shomer Shabbat. But now that they all have children, and the third son just now has a 4-week-old little girl, so it seems to me that we have, if you're a grandparent, and if you're in the situation in which I'm in which you want to be a Jewish presence in the lives of your children and grandchildren, then now that we all know how to do Zoom, I say there's some good things coming out of this pandemic, and one of them is Zoom, although I understand that Women's League was way ahead of the curve in doing this class online way before the pandemic, I understand. But now that we're all, I too, pretty savvy when it comes to Zoom. I even have my own Zoom account now. So when the little grandson in California after Havdalah says, now we're going to go on Zoom together so that he can manipulate things, fine. This is fantastic. Zoom is bringing families closer together. I never used to have seders with my family. Okay, in case you're wondering, I never used, up until pandemic, I never turned on my electronic devices on Shabbat. And now I do, because I want to be at a Friday night service. And as I already mentioned, I want to connect with my family. And on Pesach, we had a Seder where they were in California and DC and Atlanta and New York City. And that was wonderful for me. I usually run public Seders, but they weren't happening this year. So I discovered, a Seder with family, what could be nicer? So in the future, I'm going to make sure to do one public Seder and one family Seder. So all I'm saying is make it positive, make it happy, make it joyful, make it Shabbat, and do it regularly. Because thank goodness my sons are cooperating, and they don't ever say to me, oh, we don't have time for you Saturday night, or we don't have time for you Friday night. It's built into their schedule now. I wasn't sure it was going to work, and it took off, and it's great. And then, by the way, after we light candles, after Masber recites Kiddush Friday night or Havdalah Saturday night, we chat. Either the kids stay or the kids leave, but we visit them. And that has made me so happy, because before the pandemic, yes, I would fly out and visit them a lot, but I didn't really talk on the phone a lot. And now, every single week. Anyway, but that's off the topic of Shabbat. So I'm coming back to the topic of Shabbat. Do it on Shabbat. Connect with whomever it is that you want to be with. Connect with them regularly in a positive way on Shabbat. Okay, I think my time is up. Is that right, Julia?
I think so. Thank you so much.
Thank
Okay.
you.
And all the applause
Okay.
and comments here. It was wonderful
Okay.
to learn from you. Would you stay on for a minute at
Sure.
the end when we end the class?
Yeah.
Okay,
I'm
great.
going anywhere.
And just for everybody, next we have a quick turnaround. I know this class was you had a little longer than a month, but now we have 2 weeks till the next class, which is May 11th. 13th. Thank you, Ellen. May 13th, we're going to be
2 weeks from tonight.
talking about Birkat Hamazon, and there is homework in the Entering Jewish Prayer book. Chapter 13 is shorter than the Shabbat chapter.
It's only
so
11 pages, so it's
11
really
pages. You can
significantly
make that in the 2 weeks.
What chapter was that?
Chapter
short.
13. Chapter 13 for May 13th. And we're going to keep at 7:30 again. Thank you so much, everybody, for letting us make this shift, and we can finish a little bit earlier on the East Coast. And Rabbi, for some reason, my audio of the Debbie Friedman Kaddish D'Rabbanan is not working. So can I ask you to lead us in Kaddish D'Rabbanan at the end? I won't ask you to sing it. I'm not going to sing it either, but I will share the screen
You have the Kaddish Rabbinai, but help me if it's on screen. I'm more or
I
less
know, I
done.
do. I have it on the screen.
Okay, sure.
Let me just.
All right.
Hold that
Shabbat
up.
shalom to everybody, and I will, okay, I can't see.
I'm gonna move it over.
Okay,
Actually, it's not letting me move this
Julia,
over.
maybe we could just read the Debbie Friedman part in English, where we're late on the time already. You know, just to facilitate this.
Okay, Rabbi, would you like to do that since that's
Sure.
easier to see on the English side?
I see it very well. For my teachers and my students, and for the students of my students, I ask for peace and loving kindness, and let us say, everybody, Amen. And for those who study Torah here and everywhere, may they be blessed with all they need, and let us say, Amen.
Amen.
May there be peace and loving kindness, and let us say, Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, everybody. We will see you in 2 weeks.
And
Have a good
Shabbat
evening.
Shalom.
And Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you,
That
Rabbi
was
Judith.
so
Shalom.
wonderful.
Thank you. Shabbat
Wonderful
shalom.
class.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Shabbat
Bye,
shalom.
Latoya.
Shalom, shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.